Nancy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's good to finally be on.
I know. Well, we've just had, for the listeners, we've just had a couple of grueling, maybe is too strong a word, but very busy days, judging a lot of different spirits.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm a little tired. Your palate. Yesterday, you said you needed a tongue graft from the tannins and the proof.
Exactly.
But we're here. And I've been wanting to do this interview for a long time, so I'm excited to get started. Could you begin by just giving our listeners a sense of who you are and what you do?
Sure. I'm Nancy Fraley. I work as a independent, or I should say maybe freelance master blender for a number of distilleries. My main ones I've been working for 10, 11, 12 years are Joseph Magnus Distillery in Michigan. I had to think about it.
Yeah, well, they've
been drinking a lot today's the past 3 days. Holland, Michigan, still Austin, and you guessed it, Austin, Texas. J. Henry and Sons up in Dane, Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
I had been the master blender at Wyoming Whiskey for 9 years, and I left in 2013, and now I'm also working with 7-3 Distillery in New Orleans, but I have a lot of distilleries I've been working with all over the world too, just on special projects.
Yeah, I'm sure you get a lot of special project requests in addition to the sort of like long-standing contract. So I don't want this to be a blending 101 conversation because I don't like to talk down to my listeners. My listeners are very smart people. Things I assume about my listeners are that they know generally what a blended product is, that you're taking more than one barrel. It's not a single barrel, basically. Anything beyond single barrel is kind of a blend. That's where it starts. And then, there's different types of blends. There's, bigger batch blends. Mm-hmm. There's a couple of barrel blends that you can do finishing and then blend, a cask finish into something else. So I know that there's some basic assumptions about blending that our listeners will have down pretty pat. But what I'm hoping that we can talk about today is some of the more intermediate and advanced level stuff, almost getting inside the head of a blender. Because like when I think of you, I have a ton of distiller friends, but when I think of you, you're not a distiller. You're working with distillers to do something.
I did start off as a distiller, actually.
Well, I want to get to the origin story in a second. I do want to get to the origin story, but hopefully, for listeners, we'll get into some more heavy duty details here. I want to start by talking about like what a day in the life of a blender looks like. But speaking to that backstory, what does religion and spiritual studies have to do with spirits at all, or how did you parlay from one into the other?
Yeah, sure. So I don't know if your listeners know, as an undergrad, I studied religious studies, kind of concentrating on Buddhism. I got my master's at Harvard Divinity School. Again, with the Buddhism, Buddhist studies is my primary focus, particularly Tibetan Buddhism. So I studied a lot of ancient language, Sanskrit, Tibetan, just a lot of stuff. And I was going to go on for a doctorate in that field. And I don't know if I literally just woke up one day and felt like I had nothing to say, but in a sense I kind of did. Like I just felt that path was not right for me anymore. So I ended up moving to California, went to law school. Studied international human rights law and also, of all things, admiralty and maritime law.
Which is good. Barrels go on ships. Ships bring whiskey to places.
I'm a big ship buff anyway, so I
boats are cool.
Boats and ships, So, and I had actually gone to I don't know if I'm veering off of your question, but I had gone to after law school, when I was working for a labor employment law firm. I'd gone to a fundraiser in Oakland, or the museum in Oakland, and it was there that, among many things, they were tasting, all kinds of local cheeses and artisanal things, beers and such. And I walked into a craft spirits portfolio, and it was there that I had a chance to try Germain Robin brandy for the first time. And I know it's so cliche, but I was already into spirits at that point, and studying a lot about them, but that experience literally changed my life. I mean, within a year and a half or so, I quit my job at the law firm, traveled around the world some, and before long I was actually working at the Germain Robin distilleries. So that's kind of a long-winded
yeah.
So I don't know if that answers the spirit thing, but it's spirits are spirits, right?
Well, there's something to say. I love that you like focused on Eastern religion. I mean, I feel like to know about Buddhism, specifically Tibetan Buddhism, you need to know about the other religions and spiritual traditions that are around those, and how that history and the commerce and conversation between the people affected that. So Eastern religion, to me, it strikes me very different than Western monotheisms, which our American culture is dominantly familiar with and affiliates with. And to me, the primary difference is that one is grounded and balanced, and the other one is very ungrounded and unbalanced with the purpose of maintaining power structures for just a few, so that just a few people benefit. And so I really like this. I personally think of flavor as a very grounded and embodied thing. I do think it's spiritual, might be the wrong word, but I do think that it's somewhat sacred in a way.
Absolutely. I find, in a sense, I find my approach to blending too to be very Zen, in that it's like Zen archery, or the way of the sword, or Bushido and such. It's you spend a lot of time in the physical aspect of it, so that's like a lot of years nosing and practicing and blending until you get to a point. I feel like all my best blends are kind of done with, as they talk about no mind in Zen, and where I feel like it's not me doing the blend. It's I don't mean to sound woo woo or anything, but it's like something working through me, and that's those are the times I know it's like, oh yeah, I've got it. Or like when the idea to make Joseph Magnus Cigar Blend came to me, that was one of those moments where it was just like it.
Well, why don't we taste that and tell it, so you can tell the story? Yeah, let's taste it.
From on high.
This is great. No, this is good.
Awesome. All right. Well, I don't want to get rid of that. Keep that. Put it on here. So.
Cracking a fresh bottle.
Woo! All right.
And this isn't one of the. This isn't a bargain bin bottle.
I'll take the first pour, since that's usually a little bit more aggressive.
Oh, thank you.
And I'll let you have the better of the two.
Appreciate it.
You bet.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
All right. So that's batch 446, one of our more recent ones that just came out. Would have been probably bottled last month, I guess. Oh, shoot.
So we're talking about this kind of Zen approach to blending, this no mind, or kind of physical practice. Body becomes an instrument of something greater type thing.
Right.
How does the story of the Joseph Magnus Cigar Blend kind of help to explicate that idea?
So yeah, sure. So it's been 9 years this month when I first kind of had the epiphany, and so we're from. So I've been a pipe smoker for, I don't know, 35 years, I guess, 36, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, so, on a nice Bay Area spring evening, I was out on my deck under the redwoods. And I was having my pipe and some other, William LaRue Weller and maybe some vintage Armagnacs and such too. Nothing quite was doing it for me. And then it dawned on me, well, what if you kind of combine these flavors? And I kind of caught on that. And then I thought, wow, I come from a brandy background. My mentor, created his first cigar blend in 1994. It's an old category, at least 30, 35 years, maybe 40 even, that comes from the French brandy cognac tradition in particular. What if I did that with a bourbon? And so out come, I think it was like a Friday night, out come the pipettes. And
out come the pipettes.
And I called the owners of Magnus at what it would have been like 12 midnight their time. I'm so excited trying to explain this new concept. And they thought I meant like a bourbon flavored cigar.
Or even perhaps like that back at that time, that was when all the bartenders were infusing whiskey with tobacco, even worse.
Right. It's like, no. That's, so anyway, but yeah, that was a moment where when I got the idea that it felt like it was something working through me. And I knew that if people could understand what it is, that it could be really, that it'd be big. And
so this is like the first cigar blend bourbon that would hit the market.
I created the very first one. So this is, and that's now a 9-year, the concept is 9 years old.
Yeah. What's
in the bottle is actually 10 to 20 years old.
Ooh. Well, cheers to you. And thank you for sharing this special historic pour. Wow. For our listeners and viewers, can you share some of the label specs, like the proof point and
sure.
age?
So I let the proof just kind of fall wherever it will on these. This is one product at Magnus I never ever reduce. The very first cigar blend that we did, I think was like 100.53 proof, and to date that's been the lowest proof we've ever had. Highest was I think 133 proof. But what I do, it's finished in Armagnac, sherry, and cognac. But a lot of people, and I've noticed a lot of producers out there that have tried to replicate this think that that a cigar blend is all about the cask finish, and what they don't understand is that has nothing to do with what I'm trying to achieve. What I'm trying to achieve, so a little bit of geekiness here. So in the French tradition, if you're making a cigar blend, what you want in your distillate, you want to distill on heavy lees. So, that's all the dead yeast and all of that. And so, you get a lot of fat in the spirit. And then, when you age that, you put it in a more humid cellar. And so with those two things over, say, about age maybe 10 years to 15 years old, 20, kind of depending on, your distillation and cellaring conditions, this really elusive but beautiful note comes out. It's called rancio. So rancio, it is cognate with the English word rancid, of course, but it doesn't mean rancid in that it's bad. It means that it's what it is essentially is it's the oxidized esters of the fatty acids. So why doing the cask finish? Well, knowing, being I'm a huge vintage Armagnac fan, and I come from the world of cognac. That I've I tend to like barrels that have had heavy lees, or where the cognac has had heavy lees in it, and I know that but because the bourbon distillate isn't quite capable of kind of getting that same type of rancio note, the brandy finish is there to kind of replicate that note. So for, I don't want to give my secret sauce away. I probably just did. But,
I was going to say.
but the whole point isn't about cask finishing. It's to replicate the rancio note.
Well, it's so interesting, right?
Which pairs very well with cigar.
Oh, totally. And what I love about what you just said is that it's like when people think of a blend, they very often think of cask finishes, and the wine casks and potentially some other spirits like rum or brandy or whatever end up being the dominant notes. And really, the way that I think many other people think about blending in that way, I could be wrong, but I feel like they're trying to just get the levels right on a couple of very what you might call like primary color flavors.
Right.
And it seems like what you're saying is like, we're really actually trying to draw like more of like a three-dimensional picture here. Like time is a component, fermentation is a component, right? So to a 2D picture, we just add just with time and fermentation, or like the lees, right? That come through from the fermentation and distillation. We just added 2 more dimensions. So now we're already in like 3 or 4 dimensions, and it's a whole different animal when you start thinking that way. And I love the French connection, right? Because it's a through line that is very unique to you, and it to me it makes you the inevitable person to come up with the notion of a cigar blend, because you've got that French brandy background. Rancio is totally a French thing, going back to Brillat Savarin. Like, if you go back to the physiology of taste, he's talking about hanging pheasants and the rancio notes there. So it's been in the French consciousness for a long time. And what kind of gives me goosebumps is like, if we've got this gentleman in the 1700s talking about the importance of rancio and hanging pheasants and all of this stuff with this particular flavor in a French tradition, like, it's coming up on 250 years that it took that to jump the ocean and like actually come into our spirits tradition. So it's crazy in this fast-paced world that we live in, how something so important and so universal as the flavor of rancio that everyone can perceive can take that long to work its way into our spirits tradition. Absolutely. I mean, and that's I guess kind of the part of the American world is now, a Frenchman, 10th generation cognac maker, goes to California in the early 1980s. Makes some kind of old world style brandy using new world grape varietals and such, or legally permissible grape varietals, to distill. And then it's, one of his students comes out and kind of takes that, with the Native American spirit, right? Yeah, exactly. Our own spirit. Yeah.
So, I don't know if I actually achieve the rancio. I don't think I ever quite get to, I'm my own worst critic. I don't think I ever get there, but I think but that's the philosophy behind it.
You are also tainted with having tasted like some exquisite stuff from the paradise cellars of all these wonderful Armagnac and cognac makers, where I'm sure the rancio is just cranked to 11.
You can't compete with that. There's just no way you could compete with it.
Right. But. Well, and so what is it about this rancio, or at least the pursuit and the the transatlantic translation of this French rancio style that pairs so well with a cigar?
That's a good question. I think in a few things. There's the fact that there's enough fattiness to be able to kind of hold up to a good cigar. But I mean, I have I've been doing pipes for 35 years, probably cigars for 25, and I mean, I'm no expert on that by any means. I just enjoy it, as a fan. But I think it's having enough weight and body to be able to stand up to that. And I also think it's, rancio has that nutty tobacco. I think of like grilled walnut. Sometimes you even get like a blue cheese or, like a Roquefort cheese, prune, like these dark, heavy notes that tend to stand up well.
Right.
To a cigar.
Well, it's interesting too, because like to me, what you're describing is it has like a dual character, right? It's got the character that blends in with the smoke and has a flavor accord with the smoke, but it also has this fatty kind of rich character that also stands up against it.
Right.
Right. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, this has opened up in a very lovely way in the glass since that pour. It was lovely on the first pour, but now it is utterly enchanting. I want to pivot now from that tremendous story to a day in the life, because I know a lot of distillers. I know what their days look like. They're cleaning a lot of stuff, and they're making a lot of messes. They make a mess, they clean it up. They make a mess, they clean it up. You are at a slightly different point in the production process, and there's a lot of different. I'm sure not every day of yours looks the same. But my question to you is, on a day when you are doing the prototypical thing that people imagine a blender does, right? You said the pipettes come out, or you're down with the barrels, like to doing sort of cask management and checking up on them. Get up, get out of bed, and drag a comb across your head. What comes next? What does that sort of prototypical day where you're doing the flavor work look like?
Yeah, I love the Beatles reference, by the way. That's well done.
Sammy, let's see if we can get a little bit of a little Beatles music in here.
I love it. Well, it's never quite the same, but there are some generalities, and some of it's kind of changed over the years, just based on the fact that, like, early on when I was blending, sometimes I was actually doing the physical blending of personally dumping the barrels and all, and it's not like I'm that old. I'm just 55, but I let the young people do the physical part now. So.
Yeah, I'm thinking about picking up a cask or moving a cask right now. It's utterly unappealing. It
is. Yeah, I've been there, done that. I don't need to do it again. It is kind of fun occasionally. I like to jump in and do that kind of stuff. My day is I tend to I go to bed early. I tend to wake up early, and I find that morning is the time of day, when your palate is pretty fresh and neutral. I tend to be, I'm a morning person anyway, so I'm pretty clear-headed, and that's usually the time of day. If I'm working on, say, I'm not working at Joseph Magnus or Still Austin on site. Sometimes I am. But at times when I'm not, they send me the barrel samples I've requested. In the morning time, I'll, set that up, put it out by lot too. And also in like a order of age of the spirit and such. And so maybe in a day, in the morning time, I'll do, probably 80 to 120 barrels. Back in the days when I was at the height, I did about 220, but after doing that for many years, I ended up getting the shingles because my immune system.
Oh, and that's sampling that many casks and presumably taking notes.
Oh yeah. Taking notes and I if I'm assuming let's assume I'm working on a blend, and then I'll take notes of how I want to use it in the blend, and so and I do kind of want to talk a little bit about blending theory and in a few, and how to build flavor.
Please, yeah.
But I take copious notes of how I want to do that, and then when I finish with all of my notes, and I write out how I want to build the blend, and then I'll make a prototype. And usually that's probably enough days' work. I doing that many in a day is a lot.
It's heavy.
And if you're as you know from our time here, and you've done this kind of thing and tasted barrels, it's really hard mentally and physically. People that are not that don't do it every day probably think it's sexier and more glamorous than it really is. Don't try this at home, boys and girls.
Yeah, it is. It's a common thing.
Work.
A common piece of feedback that we get is like, oh, it must be nice to drink all day. It's like, yeah. How about you try it? Yeah. Try it and get back to me.
Well, you're spitting, of course.
Yes.
But even at that, you feel so exhausted at the end of the day. But anyway, yeah, getting back to a day in the life of a blender. Maybe after I make my prototypes, I let them sit overnight because they're very agitated usually and aggressive, and you can't really get a true reading at that point. And then the next morning I go back and see how the blend worked out, and if it did, then we'll go with that, and if not, then I'll prototype and kind of work things out. And so my days are a lot of nosing and tasting. When I'm at the distilleries, I like to kind of check the warehouses, do little cask management work, and make sure the conditions are the way I want them to be. Maybe if say we get in some fresh Armagnac cask or something, like for cigar blend, I'll the head distiller would have already gone through them, but I do the final check to make sure everything is definitely up to par. So and it's always that kind of work. I also there are times from the when the front of the house, the fermentation or fermenting and distilling side, will send new make to me to if they've been having problems, and actually what I'm going to be doing in a few weeks is to go back and kind of help with some distillation to tweak it. I don't really put myself out there as a distiller professor, I'm certainly not master by any stretch, but I know enough, and that I know it's going to work for long-term maturation, and also it's a lot of things. Sometimes more and more it's doing press related events too, kind of being the face of a brand,
right?
Too, and which I do enjoy doing. I just want to make sure I'm never doing it at the expense of the work that needs to be done too.
Right. Well, I'm really glad that we were able to kind of go through those different kind of days in the life, because I think it's also easy for people who don't know how the sausage gets made to assume that a blend happens when you pick a number of barrels and then you dump a barrel in and you taste and say, nope, we need one of those. And we grab one of those other barrels in the blend and dump it in. So does it taste good yet? And then as soon as you're happy with it, it immediately goes into bottles. And it's not that simple. There's the resting. There's the fact that you're doing this quasi remotely. So to do your job effectively, you're in a certain respect creating a kind of separated in space and time replica of the rick house.
Right.
And you're saying, all right, you're organizing, you're taking notes. And as you're doing that, you're obviously tracking trends. Like you're sensitive to micro changes that most other people are not going to be sensitive to, just based on the fact that you're recording so much and using your own body as a sensory instrument to measure data, right? Like it's almost like you're a weather station, kind of.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the fact I know in my case, with even though I am I don't work as an employee for the distilleries. I do, I'm an independent contractor, but I am the master blender.
Mm-hmm.
Even, I do all the things that an in-house master blender would probably do. Oh God, getting to your point.
I mean, it's hard. It's got to be hard remote, but
I've been, the distilleries I've been working for, like I said, the shortest amount of time I've been with my current distilleries is 10 years.
Yeah.
It's 10, 12 to 13, maybe even now. And so I know that stock intimately. I mean, I know where things are. So, it's not as much that I have to be there in person. And, in Scotland, that's really how master blenders often work there too. They're not always in the, at the distilleries themselves. So it's kind of, or in the warehouse, the barrel warehouse. So
I'm just really interested in
this
model. I'm interested in this, like this idea of like, how do you blend something if you're not there? Well, you just described it. And like so much of the lifting is on your brain and your body. Like there's so much information that's being coded into you every time, whether you're visiting the place and literally mapping the warehouse and you said the Armagnac casks come in. You're going over the Armagnac casks. Okay, I know that 4 of the 5 were good. This one had a stave leak.
Right.
All right, so now we're done, and that causes like a little shift in your mental representation of what this space looks like and what's going on. When you get there and you're like, guys, why is the humidity all out of whack in here? And that causes forward and backward in time other things to click, right?
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, it does. And I've trained them well enough at this point, just like, a master blender employee would, that, you've got people under you that you train, because you can't do everything yourself. So you might kind of supervise and be over things and make the final decision about something. But and if there are problems, then it's like, okay, maybe we need to go back and kind of look at where this problem came from. So I've found, and I've been doing this a lot more since after COVID. It kind of became I used to be on site a lot more than I am now, and it just kind of became a thing of necessity. And I'm finding, well, at some distilleries, like still Austin, I'm going to be there a lot this year anyway, on site. I mean, I'm there like every other month. And then the head distiller comes to me every other month,
which is nice.
So yeah, so we're just that way it's not just me having to go there all the time. We're traveling, but yeah, a good deal of my work these days too is training the next generation, because I mean, heaven forbid, I'm hit by a bus tomorrow, or God, no buses out there.
No buses.
Careful, drivers. But that kind of thing could happen. Something could happen. So I'm spending a lot of time these days too trying to train people under me, who'll be the next master blender, and then even out to get people under them, where it's starting to train those people too. And
well, isn't that how the French tradition got so developed that you could then take it, right?
Exactly. And that's something else too that I feel like I see a lot of. Oh boy, I'm going to go ahead and say it, but because I think a lot of whiskey fans and just spirits fans would agree with me about this, but I feel like the title of master distiller and master blender has become too commercialized and used in ways that have kind of lessened the value and the meaning of what that role really is. I know I didn't take that title myself until I heard my own master, mentor, call me that
Refer to you.
in the presence of other people. So then I thought, okay, and I started hearing other peers say that as well. So I thought, oh, okay, and I felt uncomfortable about it at first when I took on the title as master blender, started calling myself that, because I think it takes a lot of if you really respect the tradition like they do in France, if you're studying under a master blender and say you're on the his or her tasting panel,
right,
you don't even get to speak in that panel until about you've been doing it for about 8 to 10 years. I mean, you're not allowed to say anything. Now, can you imagine here in the States?
No.
After a month, someone's going to say something. I mean, it's so it's, I'm not saying we have to be that extreme here. It's not that. It's that, it's a thing that's not taken lightly.
The notion of apprenticeship.
Yeah. It is important.
Yeah.
And, paying your dues, learning, and I often find, maybe here's another way to kind of connect the religious and spiritual stuff on that side. It's like, the martial arts too can be a very spiritual thing. It's, if you attain the level of black belt, then, that it's actually very humbling, because often I'm not one myself, but people I've spoken with about it, that they say, wow, now I realize all I don't know. And just what's ahead of me at that point of learning. So I find it very similar to that. Well,
and other things too, right? Like Zen Buddhism, like you don't get to be a Zen master just because you figure out the sound of one hand clapping does not make you a Zen master, right? Exactly. I, however, am a master podcaster.
Yes.
I love how we keep on just dipping into the Zen stuff, the Eastern stuff. It's my favorite.
Cool. I love that.
Could we maybe dump, and then I know you wanted to talk about blending theory. So maybe if there's an example on the table that would allow us to taste and maybe talk about that.
Definitely have one.
Here we can.
Maybe this would be all right.
I'll take your glass. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Let's do that. All right.
Excellent.
So, and there's we'll taste this one, but I kind of can't talk about this without saying a word or two about the original Murray Hill Club.
Wonderful.
So, I'll do our pours here.
Perfect.
All right.
So what is blending theory before we start or maybe tell the story, then we'll talk about what blending theory is.
Yeah, sure.
I shouldn't bury that lead. Yeah.
So, when I got started at Magnus in 2014, actually, when I started kind of planning for the, how I was going to do their line of whiskeys. Unfortunately, we don't have the sample with us today, but the Joseph Magnus triple cask that got, I think they forgot to submit it, and I don't know why it's not here, but anyway, it isn't. That I based that spirit on a product that the original Joseph Magnus distillery in Cincinnati had released, and it was based on an 1892 whiskey that had either been finished in sherry cask or spent this whole time in sherry. So I'm not going to go into that whole spiel right now, but
I think importantly, we were speaking earlier. You did get a chance to taste that 1892.
Oh, I did, and I worked with it quite extensively, and I still the majority of it went back to the family, but I will say that there is about 200 ml of it in an undisclosed location in Berkeley, California.
Possibly adjacent to some redwoods.
Yes, yeah, possibly, but I ain't saying. So one of the original brands of the when Joseph Magnus started the distillery in the 1890s was Murray Hill Club. Mm-hmm. And we didn't have an existing sample of that had survived. So all I had to go by to make this blend were turn into century advertisements that said things like Murray Hill Club tones the tummy and clears the mind, or it was preferred by 9 out of 10 gentlemen. Or my favorite was if marriage is the dissolution of or is the fatal termination of a disease called love, then Murray Hill is the panacea to salve all your woes. Or
that's amazing.
It was just like wild stuff. I mean, I assure you, does not tone my tummy, but that's. Anyway, so when I made the original version, the gray label, I knew that it was a blended whiskey, and we were trying to in-house decide what it was going to be like, and I thought, just to kind of stick to history, I wanted it to be a bourbon, mm-hmm. and not just like a blended whiskey, because I wanted it to have some integrity and be of quality. So I decided to make it a blended bourbon under that legal category.
Right.
Although I will say, for every say 16 barrels of bourbon, I only use 1 of light whiskey. It's just like it's kind of a nod, a token, and not the prominent style. So that is the basis of what we're tasting right here. Mm-hmm. So Murray Hill Club, I created that in 2016. Maybe it was the end of 15. Well,
I remember the release.
Yeah. It's been,
pre-pandemic by a handful of years.
Yes,
sure.
9 or 10 years at least. The first edition of the special release came out, and I want to say 2017. And this one is where I kind of take the basic concept of the Murray Hill. I make it into a blended bourbon, but I don't always. It's not just like I'm taking this liquid and finishing it.
Right.
I do interesting things with it. So it's not, people say, the special release is twice as much. Why? Well, it's not just that it's spent time in a Calvados cask. It's that I completely kind of reformulate the entire thing. So, for example, this is a blend of 9-year-old MGP 21% bourbon, but
21%
rye bourbon.
Yep.
Yes. Probably what's more interesting about it is that that what I do for the 17-year-old component is that I add a rarely known about, at least these days, and rarely used Q yeast.
You're giving away a lot of secrets
strain.
here.
It's okay. I'm not worried about anyone.
Nancy's not worried. Come at her.
It's fun to geek out and
Yeah.
I ask for forgiveness later, right?
So Q yeast, what's noteworthy about that? What sets it apart?
So back in the day, what is now either, I don't know if you want to call it Ross and Squibb or MGP or whatever that campus is. When that was like Four Roses, they were both owned by Seagram's, right? Well, at one time they shared all the same yeast strains, Lawrenceburg and Lawrenceburg, Indiana Lawrenceburg, Kentucky
right.
Lawrenceburg, right? So when they split and went different ways, the only yeast strain that was kind of kept consistent between the two was the V yeast strain. And I think that's what strain 133, or I forget exactly what, something like that. I should know that off the top of my head, I guess. But the Q, if you have Four Roses, you often find Q yeast, and it's known to usually have a very floral kind of note. Well, what it took on at MGP after that split, what I noticed, it was more like a, for one of a better term, like a high ester Jamaican rum version of bourbon.
Yeah.
It was very just like very estery and like extremely estery, and it had a lot of fusel oils too. So it had a lot of fat in it. And when it was young, it was just, I thought, oh my God, this is terrible. What am I going to do with this? Well,
once it gets to 17 years old,
I sat on those barrels for years.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until recently that I kind of, I've got those barrels hanging out. What am I going to do with them? Well, lo and behold, now at 17, they're just hitting their stride, and I think they're going to continue because they've got all that fat in them, and the esters are finally, kind of calming down and becoming more complex and such. So that's what I decided to kind of make that the base of this blend, is to kind of ground it in the 9-year-old, and then to let that 17-year-old really shine through with the Q yeast strain. And then I finished an Armagnac cask. In a Calvados cask, which is a apple brandy from Normandy, France. And this is the result.
It is very different than the cigar blend.
Vastly different.
It's so deep. Like I feel like I'm almost like I'm sinking or falling into this, like through, like almost like sinking through water almost. Like there's like layers. It's like or like, do you know when you go into the water and then suddenly it gets a different, like the temperature gradient changes? Like there's like a gradient in here where it's like, oh, there's like, you took that first sip, but there's more. It keeps going down, and there's more to kind of uncover here. And it's way more than a cask finish. Going back to your initial point, and what delights me about the story that you just told is how much contingency there is in that, right? What had to happen for this to happen? Well, there had to be a schism between two companies, coincidentally, between two cities with the same name, right?
Right.
Suddenly we're talking about twins. This is starting to sound like a fable.
A tale of two cities.
Yeah. And then in addition to that, there had to be this yeast that kind of got transferred, and few people know about it. It's obscure. You stumbled across it, didn't like it, pushed it to the side, rediscovered it. Like there's a lot of contingency in this. And to me, obviously having more information allows you to appreciate what's in the glass more. But I'm curious about a couple of things. One, like how this relates to blending theory, which you wanted to talk about, and two, if you think contingency, if you think like these little coincidences and these sort of random, uncontrolled acts have a role to play in it, because obviously people think of blenders as people who are often seeking high degrees of consistency, and you would think that people who are in that pursuit would not like surprises.
That's true. Well, and it is true that consistency is a huge part of the job, and consistency of quality, especially. I mean, not just flavor profile, but of quality. How this ties into blending theory. So, so you can think about building flavor. I think now. Well, I'm gonna backtrack for a moment. I will say I'm really happy to see kind of a rise in understanding of blending in the United States, and an appreciation for it finally and such. And for years it was just still all about the master distiller in the United States, and blending was a dirty word and something you did not, we mingle. We don't blend.
Well, it has
a history behind it. Yeah. I'm very aware of
implied lack of purity.
Right.
Yeah.
And all of that was absolutely correct. There was a reason blenders got a bad name. That said, in blending theory, what you're trying to do is to essentially build flavor. And how you think about it, I love music. I'm an amateur musician. I like to, think about, building, bass and treble, and, or having harmony and melody and rhythm, and, if you're into architecture, you've got to have a foundation, right? And then, the structure, and then, any ornamental parts. So when I teach blending theory, or blending courses to blenders in the craft spirits industry, what I usually talk about is, and I've studied so many blending traditions around the world, not just the French one, but I kind of find blending in general and all these traditions, you can think about it as like a pyramid in building flavor. Okay, so you have a base. My European colleagues to talk about like the legs, the feet. That's the base. The next level of the pyramid is kind of what I would call your supporting notes. And again, the Europeans talk about the trunk of the body, and then you've got the top of the pyramid, and what they call the head. So the kind of the foundation is the feet, the base. Then you've got this middle part, then a little part up here.
Yeah.
So what that is, so if I'm building, say a small batch bourbon, which a small batch, smaller blends, there's a little bit more to it than that, but we'll say a 40 or 50 barrel batch. What I'm looking for might be, for the base would be what I call my A profile barrels, and maybe those are sometimes maybe a little lower in the rick house, maybe a little rounder, if had a little bit more humidity influence to them. Sometimes they're not as developed, but they tend to have really good vanilla caramel notes, but it's kind of like a narrow band of flavor. So that, have that as my base. So my next level, what I would call the supporting role, would be, and I tend to put those in what I call the B profile category. That's where I start finding say more dark dried fruit, and darker, what I might think of as darker notes, maybe a little bit more tannin. Mm-hmm. Tannin figures into this very strongly too. It's you can kind of think you're like filling in the blanks. Mm-hmm. the gaps. You kind of have this sweet vanilla caramel base, and then you're kind of building flavor on top of that. And sometimes I'll find, not always, but I might find those barrels a little bit more like center cut, in the kind of in the middle of the racks. And
Right.
of course that's going to depend on what part of the warehouse is getting southern exposure versus northern,
Right.
or is it in the middle? There are a lot of things to consider. That this is just like very basic.
Yeah.
And finally, it's the top of the pyramid, the head, is where it just like saying a 40 or 50 barrel blend, I probably want no more than 1 to 5 barrels, like maybe even 1 to 3 barrels like that, depending on the intensity. So that's those tend to be barrels that have some sort of aromatic intensity that is so great, whether it's spice or smoke or floral or fruit or
Right.
something, or tannin even. That it's so great that just a little bit of it kind of is the thing that wraps up the whole blend, kind of brings it together and draws interest and passion, makes it interesting. But if you were to release that, say, as a single barrel, it would be pretty
At least weird.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And often very tannic.
Mm-hmm.
At least for in the way, if you're building a brandy, for example, maybe you're going to look more to varietals that are more aromatic, like Viognier or Riesling or something like that.
Right.
Whereas with bourbon, what I'm looking at are not necessarily just aromatic, but like very tannic, or like with a high spice, say that maybe come from the top levels of the warehouse.
Right.
And it's, just a little bit of that can build a blend. And so you can take that theory and, you can take, say for a bourbon, same yeast strain, same mash bill, same cooperage, same everything, depending on where you put these barrels in the warehouse and how they mature. I was going to say also, depending on how you use humidity and
Right.
temperature, of course, and,
Right.
ventilation. But you can take just that one thing and create vastly different whiskeys. I'm not saying you shouldn't change or be free to change mash bills or yeast strains, but just with that one thing, you can. There's a lot of playroom if you know how to use your warehouse and know how to use humidity and temperature to create things that you want. So
Right.
So that's kind of a basic theory of.
Especially since you're in Texas, right? You've got Texas, but then you've also got Magnus, which is MGP, and you're warehousing it.
Right.
And so
And J. Henry.
Right.
Yeah, which is
up there.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
in Wisconsin.
Yep. So you're working with very different conditions there.
Yeah, and that's, well, I will say in Texas we're really working hard to we're actually looking how to retard the maturation, and so we actually have barrels that we have in a like a 10 to 12 year program that they're 5 years old. Some are about 5 years old now. They're not ready, believe it or not, in Texas.
Yeah.
And so, without that at the moment, it's kind of proprietary, what we're doing to achieve that. But I will say that, all my time studying in France and, being in the, brandy world and such, that I've learned a lot how to control those factors.
Yeah.
And so we will do it in Texas. I promise. We're working on it.
Dagnabbit. Yes. Well, so I just want to, before we move on, just comment on the flavor profile here, because it is, this is a world-class nosing and sipping experience. And I think that what you described about how you put it together and then sort of elaborated on with your explication of blending theory, really gives me a good sense of how you went about that. And that's really what I wanted this conversation to be, is to help my listeners understand some of the stuff that's going on behind the scenes, but below the waterline, the iceberg that's kind of invisible, so that they can form an even greater appreciation. Because I mean, there's simply no substitute for sipping something with the person who created it. I mean, so I'm the one who's really benefiting here.
Yeah, insiders.
Cheers to that.
Cheers.
Well, I mean, we could talk dosage and boisé, but we're getting on in the conversation here. We'll say maybe we'll do a round 2 and we can talk dosage and boisé and even nerdier, more granular stuff than we talked about now.
Petito, yeah.
Yeah.
Gotta talk about Petito.
Yes. So there's plenty more for us to do the nerd out on, but what I wanted to maybe round out on is going back to the no mind and the way when a blend is done, right? And you mentioned Zen archery, and there's the act of nocking the arrow, there's the tensile act of pulling back, creating potential energy, and during that, you really don't know, like a good archer, as far as I know, not being one myself, doesn't have a point where they go, finger, let go, boing. Like it's a drawing back until the bow releases itself using the energy created. So I don't know if that's a good metaphor.
Oh, it is.
Okay. Yeah. How does that take place in a flavor context?
There are times when I know something is ready, and I'm going to backtrack a little bit. I think I mentioned I've been teaching courses on blending and such, and fault issues for a long time.
My favorite class. Yeah. Nancy's nosing for faults. If you want to jump scare around every distiller process point,
the nasty bits. That it's oh God, where was I going with that? That I teach theory and such, but I find that and that this I hope this kind of speaks to what you're saying. How do you know that moment to let go? It's that moment of having done it so many times that that's when your intuition starts to step in, and that something is the right time. And sometimes I try and articulate that, but sometimes I don't know how well I really can. But because when it comes through your intuition, it's hard to articulate that, or the moment that you start to intellectualize it is the moment. So for example,
yes,
getting back to this, I actually think I could have taken this out of the cask just a little earlier, because I think I think I should have done it at that moment when I felt like it's ready, but I didn't. Because my intellectual mind thought, oh, no, I think I want to, but I just knew, like, say a month or so before that, this is the time. But then I, the discursive thought, and, thinking in intellect kind of overrid that. No, I think it's, it hasn't been that long, and, people will be critical and such, but really it told me when it was ready, and I overrid it, or overrode that. And I think, to be, I think it's beautiful, but I have to admit, I think I could have taken it out just a little earlier, because it was a lot happened within that month. It was kind of going into spring, heating up.
Things were
and
changing
very quickly.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of, I, hope that kind of speaks to, when, that moment to let go, or, when something is ready, sometimes you just know, or it tells you, or, you just kind of have to empty your mind, I guess, is a good way to put it.
Well, what you were describing about, like, thinking about, like, well, what will other people think? Like, you're describing monkey mind, right? Like, your other people's voices are coming in, clouding your judgment. Again, we're talking about, like, the bad kind of contingency, right? The contingency that hasn't happened yet, right?
Right, yeah.
And that caused you to do something that maybe now you wouldn't have done in hindsight. I think everybody listening or watching will understand what monkey mind is, because let's face it, that's a part of our lives. We're living in a bustling world. I'm curious if there is a feeling that you have in your body, or like you mentioned an emptying of your mind, right? Is there a feeling that you get, or is there like it would be a little strange to like anthropomorphize this and actually think that the whiskey's talking to you, right? We don't want to make, but is there a way that you feel like, when in that moment where you were like, the whiskey was telling me it was ready, like, is there a way you feel? Do you feel relaxed? Do you feel excited?
I feel like it sounds weird. I start to buzz. I mean, I actually start to buzz when I know something is like, wow, this is, and that's like when I think my best work has happened, I get excited, and I can, just feel like energy moving through my body. And it's like but I kind of have to be in a relaxed state to, when I start intellectualizing too much, and I have a tendency to do that because I'm kind of nerdy and intellectual anyway, but when
you like boats.
I guess.
Come on, anybody who likes boats gets in under the hood,
Exactly. Boats and guitars. But yeah, it is kind of, when you've practiced something over and over, and you just kind of relax your mind, and that's always when I think the best work happens, that it's kind of flowing through you. I've heard so many musicians and artists talk about this, how, I think Michelangelo talked about how the granite was, he was just removing the pieces that shouldn't be there, and that the sculpture was already there. But he was just removing things, and he didn't see it as like, I'm creating this, like putting ego into it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying he didn't have any ego at all, but I mean, I know I do, sometimes, but times when I kind of take that element out, or the ego,
right,
and go stand in the corner or whatever, it goes away. Right. Then that's really when the magic happens, when you empty your mind, or as close as you can get to that.
Yeah. Well, you in that moment, I mean, if you think about what that kind of means, if you're emptying your mind, you're taking all the other junk out of there, and the other people's voices and the expectations and how much you're getting paid for this, and the awards that you could win for it. Really, if you're emptying all that out, really it's you, the person, and then you're standing in with a representation of basically just nature.
Yes.
And
right.
That's it's both powerful and concentrated, and like it's got to be a little bit psychedelic if you can really empty it, and just like, and so I feel like that buzzing's a really wonderful way to kind of encapsulate that. And I knew the moment that you said that you dialed up your employers at midnight to tell them this crazy idea about a cigar blend, I knew that there was probably some physical, some embodied sense that you get when you're close.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was like really buzzing that night. I couldn't sleep that night, because I felt like I had been given something profound, and I know that, it was like it was given to me, not that it came that it's me. I don't know how else to describe it, but it's,
Yeah.
Like I knew that if it felt like a gift to kind of be given that,
Right.
idea. And
I really like a quote by John Stuart Mill, which is, I would not give a fig for the simplicity on this side of complexity, but for the simplicity on the other side of complexity, I would give everything.
Everything.
And maybe that's a law school. Maybe you came across that in law school. He was a judge.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
and based on what you're describing, I think one thing that sort of irritates me is when people will put out a product, and I know people do this because I've tasted these products at wonderful judging competitions like ADI here and others, and I've actually heard people, seen people work and heard people speak in ways that make me understand that this is how they operate, which is that, well, I've decided I'm a blender. I'm going to make a blend, and whatever I blend is my art. Then there's also people like the people you're working with who are deep in the science of it, right? The science of humidity, the science of esterification, the science of cask management, the science of fermentation, distillate. There's a ton of science, right?
Tons, absolutely.
And so almost what you're describing with this sort of buzzing feeling that comes after you've emptied out all of the other stuff is the art on the other side of science, not the art on this side of science, right? We're not talking crayon scribbles on the fridge.
Right.
We're talking about the art that can only come after that long apprenticeship and really being in the trenches of the science and the technical and logistical components of it. And so I guess this is where I wanted to end, because I get suspicious of someone who says, "Oh, I just know." And, "Oh, this is my art." Because,
I agree.
Because if we all did that, we would be a room full of naked emperors complimenting each other's clothes, right? Just to be nice. But we're not. It's you and me. We're in this room with these incredible whiskeys that are a product of a lot of science and a lot of technical know-how. And yet we're still talking about art. So what I'm glad that hopefully you'll agree is I think we're talking about the art on the other side of science.
Yes. I will say too, I'm not a scientist by training, but I've taught myself a lot of chemistry and I tried to really delve into the, oak chemistry and physiology and, to really learn, not to be, kind of shallow about it, I guess. It is, I am a firm believer though, that it is really after a long apprenticeship that you can attain those levels. And conversely though, I will say that, some of the people that, that I've chosen to be my mentees, that are sometimes not always, how shall I say, sometimes I notice first their talent or potential for it.
Right.
Because you can always learn the science behind it. I want them to do that. It's not, that, hey, you're talented and you don't need, but I will say that sometimes I find, and I hope this, and I kind of ties into what you're saying, but sometimes you either have it or you don't. And I found, too, you can know all or study all the science and not have it, or be able to access the art on the other side. That's technically, you get things and understand things, but to really create something artful, it's a combination of those things.
Yeah. Well, and the potential that you're talking about, to me, strikes me as a form of attention or intention, or at least the capacity for attention and intention, which both have the same Latin root word tendere, which is to stretch out or to stretch into. And there's something about that stretching, or the ability to be pliable and to say, okay, maybe I don't know much. Let's start stretching into that the same way that that a practitioner of like martial arts will continue to stretch into the physical abilities to execute the moves they need to execute.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good a good way to think of it.
Well, I would love for you to share with our listeners and our viewers how they can keep in touch with what you're doing on social media, and if there's any upcoming opportunities to like sign up for workshops with you, like where they would go to see where your upcoming events and workshops are.
So I these days I'm not on Facebook that much anymore, but I can be found on Instagram at Nancy L. Fraley, Fraley, and I post there quite a bit about my work and such. I do have a couple of upcoming workshops this year. One is going to be at the American Distilling Institute conference in San Antonio, Texas.
Heck yeah.
End of August, and it's going to be a nosing for faults class, which, as you know, is full of it's intense. It's really intense.
And you won't get this anywhere else.
Yeah. So in that, for your listeners, I basically I go through all the points of production. I don't go through every single fault that there is, maybe about 30, and I break down where these faults come from. All the way from raw ingredients, mashing, fermentation, distillation, maturation, process and product transfer. What happens when the bottling and then it leaves your warehouse and it goes to a distributor, things that can come back to haunt you from there. And so, and it's quite a sensory intensive class. Do you know the dates right off of the conference?
It is the last week of August in San Antonio, Texas. If you go to distilling.com, you'll find all of the informational links to that conference and trade show there. I will also be there, so you can catch up with me and Nancy in San Antone.
And the second class is a 3-day class that I teach on it's blending, warehousing, and maturation. Or it's maturation, warehousing, and blending. Sorry, I got it. So in that, I talk about the history of blending. Going back 700 years. I talk about and different blending traditions in Scotland, France, and the United States, and the Caribbean and such with rum. I talk about warehouses, how the actual structure, building material affects the way spirits blend or mature. How humidity and temperature and ventilation can be used to control and manipulate certain effects that you want to get out of the spirit. Barrel entry proof. We go extensively into that. How proofing, not just how to proof, but the theories of water reduction. Just everything.
The stuff we'll talk about next time.
Yeah. And but we definitely have a lot more to geek out on. So.
We've got the 300 and 400 level to come.
Yeah. Amen to that.
Well, Nancy, thank you so much for taking the time and for sharing this beautiful distillate with me. I hope that our listeners will be able to check out some Still Austin stuff, some Jay Rieger, some Joseph A. Magnus, Murray Hill, all that good stuff.
not Jay, well, they can check out Jay Rieger. I just don't
Jay,
work with them.
Oh, got you. Or what was the one in Wisconsin?
Jay Henry and
Jay
Sons.
Henry, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I think Jay Henry
so
and Sons. They also have a great podcast with Alan from Crafted Conversations.
Yes.
Alan Kogan. So maybe I'll link to that in the notes because they sang your praises on that podcast. I was loving every minute of it. So thank you so much, and I hope that not too soon, or not in a short period of time, you will find yourself in a position where you're buzzing, and you will think back to our conversation, and you'll smile. I
will, and my mentor Hubert Germain Robin, I always had a saying: "The good spirit makes for good spirits."
I will cheers to that. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks all for listening. We'll catch you next time.